Hello, my most amazing artists. Today I'm going to walk you through a drawing of birch trees in winter. So this is a winter landscape using birch trees as the subject for the landscape. And while birch trees do have smaller branches that come off of the tree trunk, I left those out of my drawing because I wanted the texture of the birch tree to be the most important, or the focal point. If you want to add some smaller branches off of the main trunks of your birch trees, you can certainly do that. I would definitely limit the number of those that you add so it doesn't take over your artwork, since in winter the birch trees lose their leaves. We are going to be drawing a kind of birch tree called a paper birch tree, and this kind of birch tree has a very nice texture to it and a very nice design on the tree trunk. If you want to add some other details like a small house in the background as I did, or if you want to add a fence to your horizon line, you can certainly add those details in as you go. You definitely probably would want to do that before you color the whole background to make sure that everything will fit. I used some perspective, which we talked about in the last project, and I made a path that it looks like it's getting further away as it gets closer to the house, because I made it wider at the bottom of the paper, and then it gets thinner or more narrow as it goes back on that path, and that is one way to use perspective to show depth in an artwork. Next, I started to add some shadows to the ground of my landscape. So the shadows that I started creating were going in the same direction because I was imagining my sunlight coming from the left side of the paper. So since the sunlight is coming from the left side of my paper, the shadows are going toward the right. If your sunlight is in the center, if you happen to draw a sun in the center of your artwork, then your shadows would be going a different direction from mine. Your shadows would be going away from the sunlight. If you imagined or drew your sunlight onto the right side of your paper, then your shadows would be going toward the left. So you need to be aware of where your light is coming from. Choose one spot where your light is coming from, and then make your shadows or do your shading based on that point of light. When you start adding the texture to your paper birch trees, the texture looks a little bit like a horizontal line, almost with an eye in the middle, or a little bit of a triangular spot in the center of that line. So I imagine that some of my lines, or the texture of my trees, was coming from around the side, so you couldn't see the whole detail or the wider triangle area. But in some of my designs, you can see the wider triangle area. I made those lines happen on both sides of my trees because that's just the texture of the tree. And then I made sure to do the shading on the same side as my shadows. When I used the crayons for shading, I did not choose gray or black. I chose blue because in my picture, it's mostly just a winter scene with white snow and a bluish sky. So I tried to use mostly blues and even a little bit of purple to make my shadows to represent the colors that are happening in my artwork. If your setting has a sunrise or a sunset and there are more colors in your sky, there might be more colors reflecting onto your trees as well. So be aware of that when you are adding shadows to your trees. Try to use colors that you have already used in your artwork, and that will help your artwork look unified and like it all belongs together instead of certain points standing out or looking like they don't belong. So here you can see that I finished my other two birch trees off camera, and I used the same techniques that I used for the first two. I hope you enjoy this artwork, and I'll see you again soon.